Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey, everybody. I am so delighted to introduce my guest today, Janine MacLachlan. Janine is on a mission to get ideas heard. She's a communications strategist with deep experience in brand positioning and business storytelling. She works with executives and aspiring leaders in the areas of executive visibility, thought leadership, and essentially getting out of your own way. Her clients have included iconic brands like Procter & Gamble, Quaker Oats, Sargento, and the American Dental Association. She contributes to Forbes in the area of leadership strategy, where she has interviewed executives from AbbVie, Microsoft, and 3M, as well as authors, academics, and novelists. An advocate for women at work, she is president of the Chicago chapter of Elevate, a global network of professional women, and is an activator at SheEO, a multinational organization that provides loans and mentoring to women-owned businesses that support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Please join me in welcoming Janine MacLachlan.
Tammy, it is such a delight to be here. Thank you. It's an honor, particularly your topic about working from the inside out is something that's so relevant today during this great disruption where people are struggling to find work that they find relevant and meaningful. So well done.
Well, thank you, Janine. I appreciate that. And yes, the more I take a look at it, the more I realize it's really bubbling up out there. And it seems like some of the things that you're working on really parallel some of the things I'm working on, especially when we're both working on helping people just get out of their own way and really come into their true selves, right? And be able to just express who they are and put that out there. But we're going to go back to your earlier years first, because that's a big part of how we even figure out how to work from the inside out, is figuring out who we are. So take us back to some of your earlier years, perhaps your formative years, and take us back there and tell us who the earlier Janine was.
Well, the early Janine was definitely a bookworm. In fact, my parents are older and they are having some health challenges. So I'm spending more time with my family of origin in Saginaw, Michigan. And there are times when we have conversations and my brother and two sisters remember things which sometimes I don't remember. And it's because I was in my room reading a book and they would be out playing softball with the neighbors and I'd be reading a book. And I leverage, that's a marketing term for you. I use that love of books and stories to write my own stories. And so when my parents were moving from the house where we grew up into a smaller place, my box came, everyone got their box. There were stacks and stacks of stories that I had written that my mom had saved throughout the years. And so It was really endearing that she had decided to save that. And the others had more, math tests and other reports and things like that, but drawings, a lot of drawings for all of us. But that, so that love of writing and reading was something that was with me very early on. And when I went to university, I got a journalism degree because I still think it's a challenge. For my Forbes column, I've interviewed novelists and people who write for a living, but journalism seemed to be more practical, if you will. And what's interesting now to see the evolution is business storytelling is really on point, where it has transitioned from just the facts, ma'am, who, what, when, where, into paint me a picture, tell me a story. How is this important? What is the message in what you're trying to tell me about. And so it really has been a lovely transition to see that now there's more of recognition of the importance of being able to tell that story.
Yeah.
So then I went to, with my journalism degree, I wanted to have a lot of variety. In fact, I think that's what's challenging a lot of people. I realized that I didn't only want to write for a newspaper, for example, or a TV station. So I went to work for a public relations agency. And that requires, you need to, even today, you need to be able to write. Secondly, there are other things in terms of logistics, putting on events and doing things. One of my favorite, I call it a side project, but I had a book published by University of Illinois Press called Farmers Markets of the Heartland, where I traveled to 8 Midwestern states to visit farmers markets, meet farmers, interview chefs, food artisans. That sort of a project used all the logistics because I had to map out where I was going to go, who I was going to see. I did all the photography, which is a visual storytelling. And so my background in public relations all helped me get to that point where I could put together this book in a way that I could tell those stories about sustainable food production, as well as these really change the world people who are selling this beautifully grown food at the farmers market. So that's a snapshot of an evolution from starting out, writing in my notebook in the backyard onto, typing up on my computer and editing my photos.
Wow. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit just to unpack some of that a little bit. I'm curious, when you got your box, when your parents moved to that smaller home, were there any stories or anything you pulled out of that struck you in a certain way? Was there anything that comes to mind that you thought, wow, I don't even remember writing this, or I do remember writing this? Or
well, one thing that I remember, so sometimes there were stories that were, probably from an adult standpoint would be very derivative. You learn about the Nutcracker and then you tell a story of, a girl getting a gift at Christmas and the adventures that they go on to. But one thing that I do remember is we had a backyard with a lot of trees, and I had made a map where in between, with boundaries in between the trees, and within each boundary of a triangle of trees was a different magical land. So some of it was science fiction, some of it was, probably an adventure in the woods sort of thing, and so the characters would go to into these different lands that were, delineated in my backyard.
Well, it sounds like, and the different lands, it sounds like we're almost different genres in a way.
Yes, definitely. And so
there's
it was
that
kind of
variety.
This grand, you can see, yes, variety. I guess I'm easily bored. We could say that for sure. But yes, variety to the way I remember rereading it is, I don't remember a narrative thread in terms of the whole story. They were just kind of like these science fiction shows that you see on occasion where, suddenly the characters are in this situation and now what do we do? That sort of thing.
Oh, it sounds like you had a wonderful imagination. It sounds like you probably had a lot of fun just creating those things.
I remember it being fun. And I remember my mom in particular encouraging me to write and keep writing. So I appreciate that encouragement from her and my dad too.
And then the choice to major in journalism, to take a practical, I guess, approach in college. Were you on the university newspaper, or because you said you went into PR, did you go into PR right out of college, or did you have experiences in other areas of journalism prior to PR?
So I did write for the campus paper, Central Michigan Life. And as I was looking at different opportunities, and again, that variety, I decided, I think when you're young and you're just getting out of school, I was from an area that was not very big, and I wanted to live in a large city. I grew up in Michigan. If you grow up in Michigan, there's a big chance that you will work in the automobile industry. So I did not really want to go to Detroit and work on, car businesses and things like that. So I had gone to Chicago a couple times for conferences, student conferences and things like that, really liked the city. And that inspired me, where there was a vibrancy there and a lot of variety. And so I picked up and I came to Chicago and interviewed with as many people as I could. In fact, I would so encourage any young people who are listening to just reach out and be brave and say, hey, I see that you're doing some interesting work, and could I talk to you for a few minutes to get any advice that you would have? I have younger nieces and nephews who are so intimidated by that. And I think it's a real challenge for some people to just share their enthusiasm and know that, everyone got the help. And so people are going to be willing to help you.
Exactly. Or to just encourage people to just be curious,
Absolutely.
And it does seem that, and I have to say, from my coaching practice, there are people who are not young who don't like asking people those questions. And I don't always, I understand how it makes people feel. And yet, I guess because I've always been so naturally curious about those kinds of things, I don't quite understand why it's so difficult for people. And yet I help people with that all the time.
Right.
But, it's understandable. So I'm glad you brought that up. But also then being a writer, being a journalist yourself, you obviously have to bring your curiosity with you wherever you go. So you were on the university newspaper, so you had that experience. And then when you graduated, was that when you decided to go in another direction just to have the variety?
I did. And as we all know, the decline of newspapers and media from a practical standpoint, people need an income. They need to pay their bills. And I interviewed with a lot of different organizations, and I ended up with a small agency that liked the variety of the experience that I brought, because with some of the experiences that I did while I was in school, had to do with events and other sorts of activities.
Oh.
So I was able to bring more of a package together.
I see.
And so it just worked out very well. In fact, you mentioned the American Dental Association. That's my one non-agency job. So for most of my career, I worked for communications agencies in a variety of different capacities. I moved to Canada. I lived in Toronto for 4 years. And part of that was because of my background and my agency experience, that the company that hired me got me a 4-year temporary work visa to work in their country and help them help this particular agency learn about some of the practices that I had brought to bear with my previous employers. So
wow, that's wonderful. But now you're in Chicago now.
Yes.
And is that where you've been based most of your professional life?
Except for the 4 years in Toronto. I've been in Chicago. Yeah.
All right. And so you've been with a number of different, sounds like PR and communications agencies, and now you're completely on your own in your own business. I'm on my own, right?
Yes,
that's right.
Yes.
So take us along the path. You did work for the American Dental Association. I believe it was for 9 years.
Yes.
And you were their communications strategist. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was director in the marketing and communications division. I also worked with a group of volunteer leaders called the Council on Communications. These were dentists who were appointed by the Board of Trustees to work with the ADA to make sure that the strategy was on point to help us understand the dentist audience, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And with the pandemic, it really just made sense to just try and look at new opportunities. I do some work with the American Dental Association. They have a fantastic initiative called the Center for Diversity in Leadership. And they choose fellows who apply to the program. It's an 18-month program to help with leadership development so that there are more ethnic, racial, gender diversities throughout the leadership in the ADA. So I work with them every year still on, I have a workshop that's called Say It Shorter. And we mentioned Forbes. So I wrote an article for Forbes saying 3 simple strategies to get your ideas heard. And those strategies were start with your headline, particularly in science, STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. People want to get so much information in and they put their thesis sentence at the end of the abstract. In that case, when you do that during a presentation or when you're pitching your boss, a lot of times people have started reaching for their phones. So start with a headline, say it shorter. That was that's the key. And then have a clear call to action. So those are the 3 simple strategies.
I like that. Thank you for sharing that with all of us. We could all use that advice.
Pleasure. And so what was interesting about that is once that article hit, I got a lot of outreach through LinkedIn saying, oh, I see you do workshops. Will you do a workshop for my team? Because we all need to say it shorter. And so that kind of evolved into something that's become a fairly robust business model. So I do freestanding, say it shorter workshops. I also work with organizations on an ongoing basis. And then also, I still have my roots of working with clients on issues management, again, shining that positive light when sometimes you're working through challenges and things like that. And I have a number of clients that I work with in just, general communications topics.
So it sounds like there's a range of things, everything from sort of general messaging to if they have, let's say, a particular PR issue or something that comes up where you can help them really come up with a message to send the kind of message they want to send if their image has been tainted in some way, let's say.
Yes, absolutely. So with issues management, the first thing is to do the right thing. If there have been mistakes, they need to be corrected. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, what I find with some clients is that for the past 2 years, people have been so focused on COVID and navigating this new situation where work is different, purchasing behavior is different for people who are selling products. Everything is completely disrupted. And so in some cases, organizations have been so busy navigating the disruption, they forgot that they have this fantastic story to tell, that they are still delivering value for their audience. And that's when I talk about helping people get ideas heard, the number one thing I work on with them is, what is your foundation? Who are you and who do you serve? Because again, sometimes people lose sight of that because they're running on that treadmill.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and yet, I think we are all so close to our own thing in many ways. We actually need somebody like yourself to help facilitate that process and help draw out those ideas. Because I think, as I always say, you can't do that kind of thing in a vacuum. You really do need either someone to ask you the right kinds of questions or get that kind of feedback from the people or the entities that you have an impact on, so that you understand what it is, the effectiveness of what you're doing.
Tammy, you're so right. And not everyone has a coach or a consultant, people can start by, we talked earlier, that curiosity.
Yes.
Start asking.
Yes.
One of the things that I encourage people to do when they're testing ideas, let's say you have an idea at the office, quote, air quotes around office.
Right.
No one goes to the office anymore.
Right.
At work, you've got an idea. Your boss has maybe shut you down in the past. So you want to really be buttoned up when you're pitching this new idea. And so what you want to do is ask, I talk about graduated levels of risk. So the first one, you talk about your idea with your walking partner, your mom, somebody who doesn't have anything to do with your profession, but just wants you to succeed. And you tell them about the idea and you say, tell me what I told you. And you see, do they feedback your key points? What kind of questions do they ask? And then this is called a feedback loop in marketing. Then you modify that. And then you're going to ask a colleague, a trusted colleague, or maybe a former colleague. And you're going to go through that process again, explain their idea, get some feedback, and then you're ready to take it to the next level. I worked with a group of academics and they said, okay, this is now you're ready to take it to the dean, or people who were wanted to get funding for their research. They're used to being in their academic circle, but they're not used to talking with people who run a foundation who might give you funding. So we talked about, here's how you paint that picture and show the value of what you're doing. Whereas some people get in the weeds with the details. I had someone from a large retailer who brought me in for a workshop, and she said, this is for my tech group. And I had someone in my office and I learned a lot about ball bearing grease, but I couldn't figure out what did he need? Did he need another full-time employee? Did he need a budget for this project? Like, what was he trying to accomplish? Because he was all down into the detail of, what needed to happen with the ball bearing grease. And so you need to go in understanding, what is your objective? Again, I said call to action. What is your ask? And that what's going to be compelling with that audience that will help you tell that story better.
Right. Yeah. I love the suggestion that as a first step, to talk to somebody who knows a lot less about what you do and get their take on it and their understanding of it. I think too often when people are looking for some feedback, they go to somebody else who either does something parallel to what they do, or, a colleague, and they stay in their lane. And I think that's a mistake, actually. My clients do that all the time, where they think they can only network with other people who do the same thing they do. And I think you really limit yourself in terms of getting a view of really what you do. So I love that advice. That's great. And I think that's helpful to people thinking about, because I think if we were to expand what you're saying here, we're talking about this in the context of the clients that you work with who are building, businesses, brands, trying to sell products or services. But everything that you're saying here, Janine, applies just as readily to an individual who is trying to grow themselves professionally, whether they're looking for a new role, looking to promote themselves or their own brand, change careers, or even advance in a career they're already in. Everything you're saying applies to that equally as well. And I'm curious if your clientele, well, you did say you work with authors and academics and novelists, so you do work with some individuals. It's not just larger entities. So you have some individuals that you do work with at times, right?
Yes, I work with individuals. In fact, I work with a number of executive level women who are interested in developing their thought leadership. And what's interesting about that in terms of helping them with that advancement, if you will, is that really starting with that audience, because I think particularly people who have a lot of experience, they kind of do things innately now. If I'm an attorney and I've got a robust business, I kind of know, so it's really a little jarring to then realize, oh, I am, interested in becoming more well-known, but what am I well-known for? So I've worked with people who are, senior level with pharmaceutical companies, law firms, again, as I said, academics. And it's really interesting to hear them. I remember a story where I had a friend who was a Girl Scout leader, and her troop was, maybe 10, 12-year-olds. And the one session of the Girl Scout troop, they were going to all go around the room and say one nice thing about themselves. And of course, the answer to that, everyone really had a hard time. And they could really say nice things about each other. And so that starts the process of you need to, again, be a little brave, text your friends, say, what am I known for at work? What do people say? They talk about the classic about personal branding. It's what people say about you when you're not in the room. I have a template survey about, if people were climbing on the mountain to get your sage wisdom, what would you tell them once they get there? And so when you hear what your friends and trusted colleagues will say about you, it's really a great ego boost to hear about things like spirit and accomplishment and things like that. And even senior level people tend to forget that because they've been just, making things happen over and over again. And they don't really stop to celebrate those successes.
No, I absolutely. Everything you're talking about here applies just as much when I'm helping somebody craft a resume or a LinkedIn profile. The same exact kinds of things I encourage people to really not just tell people what their skills are and what they can do, but who are you? What do you like to work with? So it's the same thing. You're trying to give people a sense of, if I engage with you, what is it that I'm engaging with? Not just what will I get out of it, but what am I? Yeah, it's the same thing. I want to switch gears just for a moment, because I want to make sure we get this in the interview. And that is that I know that you've done some culinary training, and that you did. I don't know that you're doing this anymore, but I know that you used to do some team building cooking classes. And I wanted you to share with us at what juncture in your career you fit that in, because I thought that was fascinating, and just wanted to make sure we touched on that.
Oh, Tammy, it's never about making lunch, right? Or it's never just making lunch. So two things about that. So I worked with Land O'Lakes Butter, and they sponsored the Baking with Julia Child public television series. And I worked with Quaker Oatmeal, and one of the barriers to eating oatmeal, marketers think about, what's keeping people from buying our product. Some people think that oatmeal is boring. And so one of the campaigns that I introduced was working with high-end chefs to say, how do you make oatmeal? And one had studied in Switzerland and made this fabulous Birka muesli, and everyone had these great ideas about how simple and delicious oatmeal can be. And so after working with a lot of chefs over the years, I thought, you know what, I want to check out the other side of the stove. So I went to the Culinary Institute of America and took a survey of classes. I don't think you can do that anymore, but I was at the CIA at Greystone, which is their Napa Valley campus.
Oh, okay.
And then I merged when I went off on my own after working with Ogilvy. One of my offerings, again, I need variety, right, was I did team building cooking classes. So we would look at the creative brief, learn about the client, make lunch, and then have our brainstorm, because there's scientific research that shows that when you stir or chop or do repetitive motion, it opens up the part of your brain that gets ideas. That's why you get ideas on the elliptical or running or having a shower. It's that repetitive motion that requires your attention, but not your full concentration. So your brain is working on the other side. In fact, one of the people I interviewed for Forbes is also a professional baker. So she's a novelist after 3 p.m., but from 6 in the morning until lunchtime, she is the pastry chef at a private club. And that's her process. She thinks about things while she's chopping the apples, and then she writes it when she writes from the library. So 2 things about that. The one that has to do with the creativity and brainstorming is I was working with a group from a large agency. They had 65 people come in for a meeting. We took over the catering kitchen at New York University, and we divided people into teams so that they could, again, get their brief. Then we divided for lunch and then have the brainstorm after. And during this time, at the intro part, a senior level creative professional came up to me and said, Janine, we just don't have time to study this brief. We can't have a brainstorm line. We really need to postpone it. This is not going to work, not going to work, not going to work. Mm-hmm. At the end, when we did the evaluations, there were so many people that said, this is the best brainstorm I've ever been to. I can't believe how many ideas we came up with. We have to do this every year, et cetera, et cetera. And what's interesting is with the teams, we divvied up the different teams created the same recipe. Then we had a big buffet. Every recipe looked different, because of the techniques and what people did to put their own spin and their own presentation. And, so I said, it's not just making lunch. But the other story about that I found interesting is I worked with a small team. We were just cooking in my home kitchen. There were 6. And this is a team that was struggling because they just couldn't gel as a team. So they wanted to have an offsite, talk about, we were starting this new era and we want to have more collaboration, et cetera. So during the lunch or preparation part, the cooking, the 2 most senior people on the team were literally slaving over the hot stove. The junior level people were over in the other corner chatting away and dipping into the wine early. And it was just an interesting, again, so I said, it's not just making lunch. It illustrated the team dynamic where the junior people could say, hey, do you need any help? The senior level people could say, hey, come on over here. How are we going to address this? How should we divide this up? So it's just interesting to look at when you do team building, a cooking class, and I don't do cooking classes anymore because, so this is not a pitch for me to do a cooking class for you.
No, I know.
There's a lot of kitchen duty on that. So I moved away from that. But having a project that's part of getting something finished within a short amount of time, like making lunch, is a really interesting way to observe your team dynamic and see if there's something that needs attention. Wow.
So that even comes under the category of organizational development. Absolutely. And that's a whole nother field, Janine.
Yes.
You've so done it all.
Things to talk about.
So I know that you have an e-series coming up. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, Tammy. So as we mentioned, my mission is to help people get their ideas heard. And so my website is JanineMacLachlan.com. I'll spell it for you if you like, but I have this 6-part
It'll be
series.
In the show notes too. So.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, yes. Any way that someone can find you, we will have it in the show notes. So.
Oh, fantastic. Because, a small aside, the Clan MacLachlan website says that there are many ways to spell MacLachlan because the name predates spelling. So how's that for a little bit of trivia for you?
Interesting. Because yes, you definitely want to look at it in the show notes because Janine does spell it a little differently than you might assume.
Exactly.
So I think we should leave it. I think we should leave it to mystery a little bit. So that
I think absolutely go to those show notes, people. But in terms of so the E-series, so it's 6 parts. As I mentioned, I want to help people get their ideas heard. What I'm hoping is that a lot of people will subscribe so that I can use this group as a beta test because there's been a lot of excitement with the consulting work that I've done. I want to try it out with some other people as well. And so, as I mentioned, we talk about the foundation of who are you and who do you serve? And then go on into, some people have this niggling idea about, I would like, sometimes people say, I would like to be known for X. Other times people feel compelled that, I want to make this difference in the world. maybe it's, I want to make this difference at my office. It doesn't have to be this big, grandiose, saving the planet or other essential things.
Right.
And so what I talk about is, so every couple weeks or so, people will get an email. There will be exercises. I talked about how I admire your book because you've got some great exercises for people to, see where am I going, et cetera, about how to put structure around those ideas, test the ideas, and then practice delivery. We didn't really talk very much. A lot of people, when they're not clear on what they want to say, that's when you get those space fillers like,
right.
And people start tripping and it takes away from your credibility. So there are exercises to try different things to address some of those habits that you might have. And then present those ideas and then get into an overall plan with how you're going to share them. It might be a content calendar. It might be a plan to do speaking engagements or other sorts of things. So it takes the reader really from the basic foundation all the way through to, and this is what I'm going to do next to help those ideas get out into the world.
This is something that people can do in a self-paced manner, it sounds like, right?
Absolutely. And that's what it's for. And it's great if you can have a buddy to do it with, because, we talked earlier about testing your ideas with someone who's a friend, who doesn't know about your profession. That helps. I encourage people to buddy up with people at work, or someone you might trust to give you feedback on, this is how I noticed you coming across in meetings and things like that. Again, since everyone's on Zoom, I can tell you, it's really interesting when you want to have a good discussion with someone and they're in the witness protection program because the light is behind them. We're still seeing too much of that, and so don't let that be you.
Right.
So, so it's something that you can do on your own or with someone, and you can do it. I work with clients on overall thought leadership, and some people want to meet every week because they're really clear on what they want to do. Other people want to think about it in between, and we might meet every 3 weeks, so this brings some principles from the work that I do with individual clients.
Right. But this gives somebody a feel for the variety of things that you do and bring to them. I could imagine somebody going through this e-series and then maybe wanting to deepen it or further professionalize it in some way and maybe hire you to work with you further on some of this.
That would be excellent. And I think that the other part, the reason I do it is I know that not everyone can afford the price point of professional coaching, and so they would be, and this is entirely free. So this is kind of my gift to the universe to help people.
That is amazing. That is truly amazing. I don't know that I realized it was entirely free.
Yeah.
Wow. That is a huge gift. I'm sure the value is huge. Tell us anything else that's coming up or that you'd like to share with the audience about what you're up to these days. I mean, you work with such a wide range of clients, and you've done a great job as a communicator, telling us about the variety of things and the ways that you help people to get their ideas heard. And it does feel like, I know this was started as a question and now I'm talking more, but it feels to me like you really do meet your clients where they're at. If they have a specific need that has to be met in order for them to step into getting their message heard or their ideas further developed, you're able to start wherever they're at and then take them further. I get that feeling that you're really great at meeting them where they're at developmentally and then taking them forward. So what else is
that's
happening?
My goal. Thank you. So if someone's interested in working with me, so one organization that I'm working with, actually two, they came to me with what they thought was an issue. And we were able to transition this into being proactive in terms of shining the light on the great things and getting those stories and those messages out to key audiences in a way that is not spammy, because sometimes executives think, oh, now we have to talk to our VIPs every week. Well, that's the fastest way to get them to unsubscribe to whatever list they signed up for. But the other thing that I would welcome, so I am a contributor to Forbes, and I am looking for those stories of people who are doing interesting, fascinating, compelling things that pertain to either leadership strategy, innovation, creativity, and so on. And I'll give you an example. I interviewed a woman who's based in Paris, and she helps people map out their future. And she does it in a number of different ways. But one of the free workshops that she does is people come to the Zoom with a banana, and they draw with an ink pen, because a pencil doesn't work, on a banana. And it's a way, for me, the way I was describing it is, you're going to eat that banana. So it doesn't have to be a beautiful map, because that's going to be in the compost pile in, half an hour. Yeah. And so, or, tomorrow or whenever. And so I'm always looking. And then I've also interviewed executives who are doing different things, like to foster a learning culture, or, I wrote about an author who wrote about, how to keep going. 2 years into the pandemic, how do we keep going? I use the game Chutes and Ladders to make your performance review more fun. Where did you climb up and where did you slide back? And that is a way of gamifying something that can be pretty intimidating sometimes. So I'm looking, if someone has a story that has to do with leadership strategy, I would invite, one of the things that I learned early on in my public relations career is you need to have a good pitch. And when I get an email that says, hey, do you want to interview my CEO? And that's it. I think, I don't know. And so be thoughtful, so people who want to reach out, I welcome hearing from you. Yeah. But it would be great if you could give it a little thought in terms of.
That's a very nice way of saying that. I get a lot of pitches for the podcast as well.
I imagine.
And I get some similar ones as what you're describing. So I would say to what Janine's saying, ditto.
Yeah. Give us something to hang on to.
So Janine, this has been fabulous. I have one more question for you. And that is, if you had to give somebody a key piece of advice as they are anticipating a transition, a career-related transition, what would be a key piece of advice you would give them?
My advice, we talked a little bit about curiosity. I think when some people are looking for their next thing, there's sometimes an earnestness about it must be this, it must be this, it must be this. And my sense is that when you are curious and are also interested in having a relationship with people, as opposed to pitching them your strengths so that they will hire you, you can find that often the analogy that I use is you're out in the back, again, food, you're out in the back shaking the apple tree, and a crate of oranges gets delivered to your door. And so the idea of just, you don't know where the ideas are going to come from. You don't know where the connections are going to be made. Sometimes I've met people that I know in a very ancillary way who have said, hey, do you want to, when we talk, do you do this? Can I introduce you to this person? And then suddenly, in my case, someone that I just know who's lovely, we had coffee, and she put me in touch with someone that ended up being a very large client now. And it was, and she introduced me to someone else who I never even really talked to. And then I get the call saying that so-and-so said I should call you. And so you just don't know. So again, with that, be curious and be out there and, just ask, and people I'm sure will be willing to talk to you. And if they're not, then, keep going and talk to somebody else.
Absolutely. Love that advice. And I think it really does pay off. It really does. Well, Janine, thank you so much for being here today. This has been delightful. I could talk to you forever.
I know.
And thank you again for being on Work from the Inside Out.
Well, it's a pleasure. And again, you deliver so much value to your listeners and now your new book. And it's
thank you.
You know, we didn't always have all of this in the sense of, you know, people who were out there helping us navigate. So kudos to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Janine MacLachlan. It was so interesting to speak with her and learn about her personal and professional journey. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you're interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them on the blog page of my website at tammygoolerloeb.com. Just look for episode 169. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my new book, Work from the Inside Out. Break through 9 common obstacles and design a career that fulfills you. It's available in print and ebook editions through my website, Amazon Worldwide, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or you can request it through your local library. If you were inspired by this episode with Janine, please share it with your friends and colleagues and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I would so appreciate reading your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find on my website, tammygoolerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.